In 55 B.C., Pompey the Great organized an elephant hunt in the circus. 20 elephants were set loose on the racetrack. Chased by North African spearmen, the elephants defended themselves, ripping away the hunters' shields with their trunks. However, as more javelins hit their mark, the massive animals tried to escape, crashing into the iron fences that protected the spectators. The barriers bent and trembled, frightening the audience. Only the quick action of the hunters, who encircled the elephants and brought them down, averted disaster. The Roman games must have been quite unnerving to watch. These hunts often featured big cats, lions, leopards, and tigers that could leap over high walls, and elephants and rhinos strong enough to break through almost any barrier. Beast hunters hurled spears and shot arrows in all directions. So did the gladiators. Sometimes entire battles involving hundreds of men were staged with real weapons. Amidst all these leaping cats and flying spears, how often were spectators injured or worse at the Roman games? Let's focus on the Colosseum, where the grandest Roman spectacles were held. According to most estimates, the Colosseum could seat about 50,000 spectators. As I mentioned in my previous video on finding good seats in the Colosseum, the worst seats were at the top, where slaves and women stood on unstable benches. Below were the non-elite sections of the Minyanum, the general admission area, where spectators squeezed onto narrow stone benches. The lowest part of the Minyanum, separated by a walkway from the rows above, was reserved for members of the equestrian order. These benches were made of marble and were wider, reflecting the high social status of the men who occupied them. However, the truly luxurious seating was in the podium, closest to the arena, where members of the Senate sat with their wives, children, and attendants. The podium consisted of several broad marble tiers. There were no benches. The senators brought their own cushioned chairs. The best seats in the house were on the minor axes of the podium, at the middle of the Colosseum's long sides. On one side was the imperial box, where the emperor and his entourage sat. On the other side was probably the pulviner, where images and attributes of the gods and deified emperors were displayed on elaborate chairs. Other special sections were set aside for the Vestal Virgins and visiting dignitaries. The seats in the podium of the Colosseum had easy access to all the amphitheater's amenities, water fountains and lavatories in the corridors, the perfumed mist that emanated from the walls in hot weather, and likely the vendors of wine and snacks who worked the seats. The most important people in Rome, including the emperor and his family, were seated in the first rows of the Colosseum. How were they protected from stray arrows and leaping tigers? The arena was surrounded by a 13-foot travertine wall, which was topped by a barrier. Although no trace survives, most scholars assume it resembled the fence that protected spectators in Nero's amphitheater. Elephant tusks projecting from the arena wall supported nets of gilded wire. At the net's base were rows of ivory rollers, designed to prevent big cats from climbing up the wall. In the Colosseum, armed guards likely patrolled the walkway between the barrier and the first tier of the podium. Sharpshooters with bows seem to have also been stationed at intervals along the podium's base, ready to react if an animal or gladiator tried to scale the barrier. Despite these precautions, several disasters occurred in Roman amphitheaters. The most notorious happened during Tiberius's reign, when a temporary wooden amphitheater in Fidniae collapsed, killing 20,000 spectators. During Nero's reign, a brawl at a gladiatorial show in Pompey's amphitheater escalated from shouting and stone throwing to a full-scale battle that left dozens dead. The Senate, wary of future unrest, banned Pompey from hosting gladiatorial games for the next 10 years. We also hear about the mundane risks of watching the games. Heat stroke, for instance, seems to have been a problem in the lower rows. Constantly exposed to the sun, it was probably in response to a dramatic incident that Caligula allowed senators to wear sun hats during the games. The animals gathered for beast hunts sometimes escaped before reaching the arena. For example, a rogue leopard attacked an artist, and a massive Indian python was rumored to hunt children in the slums of Rome. As far as we know, however, no animal managed to get over the barrier of the Colosseum. Nor, remarkably, are we aware of any fatalities in the stands caused by the arrows and javelins of the beast hunters. Gladiators generally posed little danger to spectators, partly because their weapons were designed for close combat, and because no gladiator hoping for freedom would risk their future on a wild throw that could end up in the stands. Yet gladiators did cause spectator fatalities, at least outside Rome. According to Valerius Maximus, writing during Tiberius's reign, An equestrian named Rufus dreamed one night that he would be killed by a gladiator. The next day, accompanying friends to the theater of Syracuse, Rufus was shocked to recognize the gladiator from his dream. Persuaded by his friends that he was being ridiculous, Rufus took his seat and watched the gladiator defeat his opponent. As the gladiator prepared to deal the final blow, he raised his sword high and skewered Rufus, seated in the front row, through the heart. Although we have no way of knowing whether this anecdote is true, its setting in the theater of Syracuse lends it some plausibility. Greek theaters were not designed for gladiatorial combats and beast shows. Only a low wall, if anything, separated their stages and orchestras from the seats. Unless temporary barriers or nets were set up, spectators in the front rows were uncomfortably vulnerable. Although high walls and nets protected spectators in the Colosseum from gladiators, they were still exposed to the whims of the emperors. During Domitian's reign, a spectator sitting near the imperial box complained that the emperor had rigged the game so that his favorite gladiators always won. Furious, Domitian sent guards to drag the man from his seat and feed him to wild dogs in the arena. A century later, it was rumored that Commodists planned to shoot random spectators at the Colosseum in imitation of Hercules and the Stymphalian birds. We don't know how many spectators were injured or killed over the centuries at the Colosseum. Our sources are incomplete and only mention such accidents if they happen to involve an emperor or a famous figure. But based on what we do know, it seems a day at the Colosseum was never free from danger. Even for those in the stands,